Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Ridge Community Church podcast. My name is John. I'm one of the pastors on staff at the Ridge, and our vision is to bring the hope of Jesus into every home. So as a piece of that, our goal each week is to bring you something that's hopeful and helpful. So subscribe to this podcast to make sure you don't miss any hopeful and helpful conversations. Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to this episode of the Ridge Community Church podcast. If you find today's episode hopeful and helpful, then please follow or subscribe, and then rate and review so that more people can find the conversation. Today, the lead pastor of the Ridge, Mark Weigt, joins the podcast to talk about how to talk. More specifically, how do you talk about some of the parts of following Jesus that sound strange or weird to someone who doesn't follow Jesus? More specifically, how do you talk about these things with someone who doesn't follow Jesus, but you're trying to help them get there? We talk about the supernatural, the resurrection of Jesus, the difference between weird and countercultural, and more. This is my conversation with Mark. Hi, Mark. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Always.
Well, it's always good to have you with, and especially, I'm sure you get this moment to have a little brag, right? Because March Madness, we are recording before the Final Four starts, and you have a rooting interest, right?
Well, as you can see, I'm wearing a Miami sweatshirt, but I do that anyways. Okay. So
yeah.
What's interesting is I've had people like from the Ridge, like text me, hopefully on stage, all that stuff. And here's the thing. This is going to sound odd off stage, and to people I know it's different because I like to have fun with it, but I'm honestly a humble winner. I don't sit there and brag and all that stuff. I don't do that. And it shows you as we're going through this process, it's been like, okay, so why there's a little potential to brag, opening to brag. I love watching the UM basketball team play. I just don't like the fact that the basketball team's ahead of the football team because it's a football school. So in one way it's great and it's fun and it's cool to watch, but in another way it's like, oh, come on, football team.
You know, when you were waving that Super Showdown trophy around, I don't know if I would have quoted that as humble winning, but
that's humble winning.
We can move on there. Do you have any predictions? Do you think they're going to win it all?
I think UConn's going to probably win
the
national championship. I think they're the best team left.
Well, by the time this is out, we'll know.
Yeah, that's right. If I'm a prophet or not, that's right.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
Well, I'd love to get started chatting about our main topic today. And just a little background. So, as you know, we talked about this before, Mark, but I was a comparative religion major in college, and it's kind of cool opportunity to study all these different religions and things like that. And one of the things that struck me was you hear about religions that aren't your own, and you're like, that kind of principle is a little strange. That's a little weird thing, right? And I am positive that there are things that people hear about following Jesus, and they're like, That kind of sounds a little strange, a little weird to me. Easter is a great example of this, right? Like we encourage people to invite their ones to Easter. You know, that person in your life that you are actively trying to invest and help them experience the hope of Jesus. But the heart of Easter is the resurrection of somebody coming back from the dead, right? Which can be a weird thing to talk about. So I wonder, just this whole idea of talking to your one about some weird things, do you have tension or feel weird whenever you're talking about some of the elements of following Jesus that are a little bit more out there than others?
Yeah, it's funny. I used to feel that way, but I don't as much anymore. And I think there's a couple things that lend to that. I think, first off, you got to know who you're talking to. Okay. As we kind of talk about some stuff like this, it's not a one size fits all. And so it's really important to always know who your one is and how they respond to things, how they view the world and how they see things and all that stuff. Are they more feelings based? Are they more intellectually based or facts based? Let's call it that and all that stuff. And so one of the things that I love about the resurrection, while I always acknowledge, and we'll acknowledge it, this Easter for the message and all that stuff, is, hey, last time I checked, everybody who died stays dead. Okay. I've never been in a funeral. I've been a ton of them where all of a sudden they just woke up right there. Now that would be cool if that happened, but we all know that ain't happening. So as a Jesus follower, we just get so used to that, it's just kind of like, oh yeah, but then when you really think about it, you're like, holy smokes, what we believe is a supernatural event.
Yeah.
So, okay. So going back to what you were talking about, you know who you talk to for in the resurrection, for some people are more head based. Hey, well, I got to know and all that stuff. The beautiful thing about the resurrection is that we can encourage people to look into it and help them look into it from an intellectual standpoint to go, hey, you know what? You don't have to check your mind at the door for this one.
Yeah.
There is enough credible evidence for you to arrive that this actually happened.
Mm.
So, once again, so if that's the person, now the other reason I don't feel weird about it, because in our culture today, if you're not like, one of those people that head based on stuff, is that the supernatural and stuff like that has become normal now.
Hmm.
People engage more in supernatural. They're looking at more supernatural stuff. They accept more supernatural stuff now than ever before. And I don't know if this is maybe the culture coming up that's driven this.
Yeah.
And so for now, it's not weird anymore. So when you talk about supernatural stuff, they don't look at it as weird or crazy. They're like, okay, hey, tell me more. And so it's just there's this shift that's happened in culture,
Yeah.
I think, over the last 7 to 10 years.
Why do you think that shift has happened?
I don't know. I think some of it is just some of the really well-known TV shows and
Yeah.
series that have happened that have dealt with this. I mean, there was one called Supernatural. Okay, that was out forever. But there's others.
Yeah.
There's a lot of the zombie stuff and just different things like that. That is just, once again, I think people just all of a sudden, oh yeah, okay, I may not understand it, but I can accept that as reality because boom, I watch it, I see it, all that stuff. And I think that's it's not as strange anymore, John. It's I used to longest time ago, oh yeah, that's weird. People will never. And I'm like, oh, okay, people just are okay with it.
So do you think a lot of that is kind of in our own heads? Like we kind of get in our own mind and kind of like there's that little fear element of what somebody's going to think. Do you think that's a big part of it?
I think it's important that as a Jesus follower, okay, that I think even before those conversations and stuff like that, I think it's really important for us to constantly be wrestling with what we believe. Because if we're not wrestling with that, then we can't help other people wrestle with inviting them into that story that we're a part of.
Yeah.
And so, when people say, well, I just believe in the resurrection. Okay, well, you do know what you believe, don't you? I mean, you were believing in someone rose from the dead. Well, I just believe it. Well, you need more than that. Okay, eventually you can start there, but eventually you really got to kind of dig into that a little bit more and go like, yeah, I'm wrestling with a supernatural event. Hey, I've never seen that. I've never experienced it. Why do I believe that? Why can I believe? I think it's a really important thing that every Jesus follower, they need to wrestle with some things like that.
What does it look like for you to wrestle through something? Like, so if you, I'm sure at some point you wrestled through this.
I have. Yeah, I have. I'm more of a head guy. Yeah, I'm more of a head guy. So for me, let's just say I went through a period where after I'd followed Jesus for a while, I just started to go like, it's almost like it's a deconstruction. I know we've touched on this before. It's a little bit of a deconstruction when someone goes, you didn't really believe that stuff, do you? It's kind of like, do I really believe that stuff?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Honest question. Yeah.
It is, you allow the challenges of culture that are challenging your faith to not believe their challenge, but to go like, hey, wait a minute. That's a good question. And then to go, hey, I've got to look at this again to just make sure there's some roots to this thing. And so for me, I listened to some talks by Lee Strobel and some others that just are really that have wrestled with this and looked at it from an intellectual standpoint, a scientific standpoint, even a legal standpoint to some degrees. And so I just did kind of my own journey to go, okay, yeah, okay, I get that. Never thought about that. Hey, this is still a struggle. I think that's just a really important thing. So when people ask me about it, I've wrestled, so now I can have a wrestling conversation with them.
And you don't have to feel like defensive or scared because you've already done that internal introspection.
Well, I think it's important to go, hey, I get it.
Yeah.
They're not looking for clean and neat. I think we're all afraid that they're looking for someone who has all the answers to get it all together and it's all set in stone. If it's that easy for us, we're not going to connect with people. Okay. But if it's like, hey, I get it. That is a stretch.
Yeah.
And hey, here, I've wrestled with that. Here's some of the things that I've wrestled with and had to do and all that stuff. And so, hey, listen, I get it. If you're struggling with it, it's okay. It's okay.
And does that apply for more than just like the resurrection, but some other of the more kind of strange or I'll say challenging parts of following Jesus and the Bible, whether it's, the Holy Spirit or miracles or things like that? Do you wrestle through each one individually, or what does that look like?
Yeah, I think once again, I think there's a in my mind at least, John, I think there's a difference between weird and then challenging and counterintuitive.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think they're very different categories. You know what weird is now is when you read about Jesus spitting in a dude to heal him. Okay. Now that's weird.
Yeah.
All right.
That's a good point to
Let's
put it.
be
Yeah.
honest. Okay, that's weird. And you're gonna read that. And as Jesus follows, we should read that and go, man, God, that was really weird. He didn't have to do that. He's spitting on a guy and he's rubbing his face.
Yeah.
And okay, that's weird. But I think for many of us, what has turned into weird is it's just so counterintuitive and it's challenging. So, for example, what some people would say weird is like, when Paul talks about marriage and he says, hey, submit to one another.
Yeah.
Okay. Now in our culture, it's like, whoa, that's weird, and some of it is because of the abuse of the passage and also, okay. But in all honesty, it's not weird. It's just challenging. It's counterintuitive because when you dig below the layers, you go, oh, yeah, well, now that makes sense. Every marriage will work if it's I'm here for the other person.
Yeah.
And so, what is often weird is really just challenging or counterintuitive. And so we got to sort through that a bit.
Yeah.
And I think personally, we just surrender is, some people would say that's weird. And you don't know what that really is? It's just challenging and counterintuitive.
Which fits really well into the whole series we've been doing, Against the Grain, right? Where it's just been full of countercultural, counterintuitive things that when we recognize them are actually helpful.
And I think that's where our story is really important, and really knowing our story, because when we get into conversations like that, it then doesn't become, well, that sounds really weird to me. Someone says that. And I think it's okay to go, honestly, it wasn't weird to me. I realized it was very challenging for me because I think this way. And most of them are going to go, yeah, me too. Hey, but you know what? Here's how I've seen, as I follow Jesus, this play out in my life. And then all of a sudden it becomes a story-based response, okay, versus, an A plus B equals C response. And I just think there's a power of story.
Yeah.
That's just really, people are really hungry for nowadays.
So when somebody who doesn't follow Jesus asks you these types of questions, is that why it's like so important to, like, one, like you mentioned previously, having a good understanding of where they're at and who they are, right? And so obviously there's a little bit of an assumption of a relationship here and some trust there to be able to have this conversation, because somebody off the street that asks you about something random from the Bible, they're not looking for a genuine conversation most of the time, right?
Right. That's right.
So I guess my question is, where do you start, right? Somebody asks you one of these questions and you mentioned, is it story? Is it fact-based? Is it acknowledging the challenge of it? How do you get started with that conversation?
Well, if I'm in a conversation and they ask me a question, I think it's always important to not answer the question first. Okay. Because what I've just learned with talking with people, and it's just so much fun, okay, when you really see someone that's asking questions, it's like, wow, they're on this journey and God's allowed me to, be a part of this in this way. It's sacred stuff. And so we shy from it. We shy away from it. And I think we shy away from it sometimes because we're afraid of not fitting in or making a fool of ourselves or just looking stupid or something like that. And you know what? Here's what I always tell people. I was just talking to someone this past week who was sharing a story with me. And she's like, I feel like I really blew it here. And I go, hey, let me tell you a story where I blew it last week. And I shared the same thing. She's like, you blow it? I'm like, heck yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
And that's just part of God uses people who blow it. Okay. Yeah. And all that stuff. But so once you get past all that, I think it's really important. Instead of answering questions a lot of times, I always try to find the root of the question. And the root of the question is they'll ask a question and I'll go like, oh man, that's so great. Hey, tell me why that question is important to you. And because oftentimes the question that they're asking is the surface of something that's covering of something that's much deeper. And so you can spend time answering that question, but that's not really the heart of it. And so it's that second question to their question that really gets at the heart of it. And when you start getting at the heart of it with people, that's what matters. That's what matters.
Yeah, I feel like that is personally something that's been historically really challenging for me. I feel like, especially like, you leave seminary and you're like, I have my Rolodex of answers. And it's like, I just want to be able to show you my answer, or you don't know and you just run from it. Right. And, but that is a much more personal, meaningful way of connecting with someone, right? And answering their question, because you're not, the question that they're asking you isn't about you, or isn't it about how you can answer, but rather how you can help them, right?
Yeah, it's interesting when someone says, a lot of times people ask questions about, well, why does God allow bad things to happen? Which is a fantastic question. Okay,
Yeah.
I mean, if you even as a Jesus follower, if you don't wrestle with that one at times, I mean, then you're completely numb to what's going on around you,
Right.
because I
Yeah.
am. But even in questions like that, I could sit there and give them a 3-point response, like, well, and here's the thing, they're not going to go, man, that was really great, I think I'm going to follow Jesus now. I've never had that happen. But when you go, and that's a great question, hey, tell me why that question's important to you. And then all of a sudden they're going, look, oh, hey, my mom died of cancer when I was 10. Or, then it's like, whoa, this is okay. And that all of a sudden changes everything.
Yeah.
And because most of the time questions are personal. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they really are intellectually based and they want to know and wrestle through it. But a lot of times that's where they go and that's where they are. And you're all of a sudden, you're hearing more, they're opening up more of themselves to you in their story. And I just think that's sacred stuff.
Is there anything you'd avoid doing during that process, or avoid saying?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, fixing it, minimizing.
Yeah.
I mean, really. Well, God was no, 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 no. Hold on, hold on, hold on. No, no, no. You want to listen to that, and you want to. I mean, honestly, just go. Hey, listen, that must have been horrible. That must have been brutal. And you care, you say things. You want to just. So we're called to do, love people. Okay, we don't need to be God's attorney representing. Right. Okay, I mean sometimes I think we need to. I'm like, well, I could never follow God because he did this and he's and we step in and go, whoa, hold on, and no, God can take care of himself. That's not our job to be God's attorney. They're to love that person on his behalf. And when the time is right, to talk about God in the center, in the middle of all that, and God's feelings for them and feelings for that, that's a part of it. But it's just really, really important that we stay out of the, well, hey, let me fix that for them. Let me correct their quote unquote view of God or that circumstance. That's not the time.
So it's a little bit about being able to wade into, even if somebody doesn't have maybe the same view of God as you do in that moment, that's okay in that moment.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Hey, listen, because here's the thing. If unless you were following Jesus from as a kid and you don't remember any different, if like I followed Jesus in my 20s, my view of God changed after I mean it was so different than and so that's part of the journey, and that's part of the beauty of the journey, I think. And so we got to allow people to walk alongside of them and be okay with that, because that was us at one time. That's okay.
Yeah. So if somebody asks you a question, and because you see this all the time, right? Something's happening in the news, right? A great example would be like the revival that's currently happening in Asbury. Revival's going on. Somebody turns to you and say, "Hey, I know you follow Jesus. What do you think about this cultural event?" Right? How do you engage with those types of things?
Yeah, my neighbors were fun, and they're always fun because none of them follow Jesus. Okay, and close with our neighbors, love our neighbors, and they'll often say things like that to me about stuff, and they'll make fun of it and all that stuff. Yeah. Okay. And here's the thing: if I wasn't a Jesus, I try to put myself. If I wasn't a Jesus follower, I would probably make fun of it.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, depending on what the topic is, so taking the Asbury stuff and some of the things that they're seeing, to them that is, let's talk weird. That's weird.
Yeah.
And the biblical idea of that is, hey, we're basically dead in our sin. We're dead to the things of God. So what is someone who is not there with God, what are they going to see that as? Well, they're going to see that through the filter of someone that goes like, yeah, that's weird. I have no connection to that whatsoever.
Hmm.
I see it and go like, man, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So what in my response to things like that, I don't want to dig in there too much and go like, hey, what's going on there? There's an awakening. They don't care about any of that. In times like that, I'll just laugh and I go, man, I don't blame you for seeing it that way. Or I'll just go, hey, I get it. I get it. It looks weird to you. I get it. I get it. And have a little fun with it and all that stuff. But if there's other things that maybe aren't that, but maybe it's something else, like maybe if there's we've seen church leaders fall.
Yeah.
Okay. That's been in the news. Okay. Now we're not laughing about that one.
Right.
And if they bring something like that up, oh, church leaders have done this and all they do is this and all that stuff. That's a different conversation. And that for me is like, man, guys, I that bothers me too.
Yeah.
And now I'm connecting with them by acknowledging, yeah, that's a problem.
Hmm.
And that's hard for me to see. And all that stuff. That's a different thing for me. But here's what I know. And I'll often
Yeah.
say, but here's what I know. Not excusing behavior and all that stuff, but one of the reasons why I love the local church is because it's full of broken people like me.
Hmm.
And broken people, when you get broken people together that where God is really doing a work in their lives, you still get brokenness at times.
Yeah.
But I still think the local church is the place where we acknowledge it and God redeems it. There's no other place in the world that does that.
And going through what you were talking about previously, I mean, that I have to imagine that comes from a place of you've wrestled through those things personally before, right? Where you've wrestled through those thoughts about, hey, what is the best thing for the local church and what happens if a leader falls? And you've personally wrestled through those things. I have to imagine that's coming from that place, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you see it all over social media when you see this stuff. And I'll read some of that stuff just because I look for people who aren't church people. I look at their responses.
Yeah.
Okay. And a part of me just goes, man, I understand. I get it. I mean, your expectations are more.
Mm.
Okay. And they're higher. And a part of that, and we talk about this even in our church, we talk about this. Some of those, what's interesting is people's expectation. And we have to acknowledge this. And this is part of engaging with your ones and all that stuff. Part of their expectations are unrealistic because they're putting expectations on church people they don't have for themselves. But not that doesn't excuse, but what that does require. So they're expecting church people to be perfect. Okay, and they wouldn't say that, but they are.
Sure.
And they don't want to step into that so they can continue to be imperfect and be okay with it. Okay, so that's where the mindset is. And that's why I always acknowledge that and go like, man, that's why I'm there, because I actually acknowledge that I'm not, and I really need God's help to continue to walk through some of this stuff.
Mm.
And so and you're kind of acknowledging the imperfection. And no, church is actually a place for the imperfect, for the struggling, not those who have it all together.
Yeah.
And so when you just acknowledge some of that and bring that out, there's like this different narrative that you're giving them.
Mm. Sorry if we're getting a little bit too into the weeds here, but I'm just really curious. What's that line between we don't want to bash other churches, right? Because they're going through something that's really challenging, and maybe they've even made decisions that we don't agree with, right? There's got to be that line of like, you want to acknowledge that, yep, they did mess up, but also not join in on the bashing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I always say, I think as a Jesus follower, we got to look at it this way. That's our family. Okay. Yeah. And we all have in our regular families very dysfunctional parts of our family. Okay. I mean, we all do. That's family. So I think it's okay to go, man, that's really hard for me to see. And I don't necessarily agree with all of it, but I really pray that they work through that and get it worked out right. Mm. And so I think it's okay to acknowledge, first off, the sin and the failure, but then at the same time to go, man, I just pray that they get that done right. versus writing them off like everybody else does, because in doing that, we are responding like culture does.
Yeah.
Sin, mistake, I'm done with you.
Hmm.
And we got to tell a different story of sin, mistake, redemption.
Yeah. I've got to imagine that that is something that includes not just church elements, but you earn the right to be consistent. Where that happens with a celebrity, and they have a fall from grace, and you have a tone that always maintains its own loving nature, even if it's not. Because then you earn the credibility to talk about all things that way, right?
Yeah, I think there's that's why I think, when we talk about investing in your ones and all that stuff, man, there's such a hunger and a desire for a redemption story in our own life. Okay. And so when we see that stuff play out, with famous people, athletes, Hollywood stars, and all that stuff, that's why, first off, when they fall, we shouldn't be surprised. Okay. Not that everybody falls. So when I say that, but, there shouldn't be a surprise for us. Two, we shouldn't judge, because I always go, man, at that age and without God, with all that money and fame, um, I would probably do the same thing or worse. Okay, so there should be that grace of God side of things. And then the third
Yeah.
thing, like, okay, God, do a great story there. That's a
Mm.
great story possibility. Oh God, that
Yeah.
would be really good if you stepped in there and did something. Because that's what our ones want. Deep down, that's what they want. They
Yeah.
really do.
So switching back, I think to like maybe some of the supernatural questions and things like that of that nature. There's probably going to be questions that people get where maybe you're just not very confident in the answer.
Mhm.
Something maybe from the Old Testament, or hey, can you describe to me perfectly the Holy Spirit? And how He works within God the Father, God the Son. When you don't know, what do you do?
Yeah, I think the key is that understanding, we think that people are looking for someone who's got all the answers, and they're not. They're really not. All right. So what do? You're honest.
Hmm.
And it's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, I don't fully understand that either. But hey, do you want to look into it? Look into it together? It's okay.
Yeah.
Curiosity and wonder and all that stuff are a part of the journey. And I think we've taken it as, okay, it's black and white. I know everything or I don't. And let me give you the cookie cut answer and all that stuff. No, it's okay to just be real and honest, and just to go, I'm wrestling through this, or I don't know, or hey, would you like to look into this together? Hey, I heard this podcast, or hey, let me ask someone that I respect and know, and maybe they can get us a book or something like that we can go to, or a podcast we can go through together. I think that's really, really important.
Hmm.
Really important. Be freed from having to know all the answers.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just authentic and refreshing, I think.
I think people are drawn to that.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, if you're a follower of Jesus and you don't know anything, I mean, they're not going to be drawn. But I'm just saying, you know,
Fair enough.
I mean, that's the beauty of following Jesus, is that our entire life is we're growing, and we're being stretched, and we're learning, and all that stuff. And so we're lifelong learners and livers following Jesus. So
Yeah.
man, it's okay to go, I don't know. I'm not sure. That's a great question.
I think that eats away at some of I think the biggest misconceptions that are surrounding being able to invest in someone and help them find Jesus. Is this concept of you have to know the answers, you have to be a pastor, you got to work for a church or something like that, when it's like, no, you don't need the answers. Everyone is called equally, and everyone can make an equal impact in terms of impacting somebody's life.
Yeah. I'm really seeing more, John, that the key times that God opens up doors, okay? I mean, there's conversations that happen here or there, okay, that will provide opportunities maybe for you to say something or ask a question or anything, like, something along that line, maybe share your story, hear their story, okay?
Yeah.
So there's those times that are really important. But the big times I'm really seeing are the key transitions in life. Transitions being maybe a season transition in someone's life. It might be they just had kids, or they, become parents, or their parents or their kids are transitioning into a different season, like teenagers or something along that line. Something tragic happened to them or someone in their family. I really see things like that. Those are the times that the door is blown wide open. And those are the times. How we respond in those times, I think, are really, really key. I really do. Because that's when the seeds, the soil becomes more fertile.
Yeah.
And how we respond or don't respond is really critical.
Is that something that you recognize beforehand, or is that more in the moment?
I think, well, I think the transition time, if you're really investing and you're really having a good trusting relationship with someone you care and love, and you want to see them find Jesus, they'll tell you. They won't say, well, I'm going through this transition. They'll go like, hey, our kids just became this. Or, hey, my mom is really sick.
Yeah.
They'll say, hey, I've got this doctor's appointment this week and I'm a little nervous about it. They'll say things and to cue you off. Or if you say, hey, tell me what's been going on in your life. I haven't seen you in a couple of weeks. Tell me what's been going on. And they'll cue you. You got to be listening for it though, but they'll cue you. And everybody's private, nowadays. Okay. So when you step in and not invade their privacy, I'm not talking about that, but I am talking about when you step in and you love them because you love them and you really show that in the way Jesus has called us to show that, man, that's attractive and life-giving.
Yeah. I mean, everybody has this deep desire to be seen, to be known. And so regardless of who they are, I think we're taught early that as soon as you get known, then you get hurt, and it's like when you have the ability to like show somebody that that's not true for you, it's impactful.
Well, that's when all the, you talked about the questions and maybe some of the weirdness and all that stuff. That stuff then begins to dissolve. That stuff is not as important anymore because now we're Jesus with skin on and we're there with them and walking with them and whatever that may be. And there's just something about that just begins to change things. And it really does. It's and more in our culture nowadays, the surface level stuff doesn't matter as much anymore because they know the surface level stuff. They can go on Google. They can go on YouTube. Yeah. They can go listen to people and all that. Okay, all this stuff. Okay, they can do all that. But you can't Google loving another person. And you can't watch that on YouTube and really feel, no. That's something that, as they say in the Christian circles, the incarnation. And Jesus became one of us and he walked and he lived and he engaged in relationships. And now we're called to do the very same thing.
And I think it's something, and we're wired to be able to do that. And so I think that that's like hopefully as people are hearing that is an encouraging thing where it's, somebody asks you a question and you may not know the answer. Somebody asks you a question, you're worried you're going to say something that sounds weird. But the more and the more that you relationally connect with them, show them they're cared for, love them well, serve them well, like you said, and those things matter less and less, and that's more and more freedom to not have to get everything, quote, right.
There's this guy who came, my wife and I go to the same place every Friday night, okay? So we're there. And there was a guy, he's probably in his late 50s, early 60s, okay? And he's seen us there, and we were talking and all that stuff. And he finally asked what I did, and eventually I got around to telling him the truth. And we, and so I then asked him, I said, did you grow up going to church or anything like that? And he kind of shared his story, no, and all that stuff. And I said, well, tell me some of the reasons why, and just asking him questions, okay, not trying to look for things. And he just began to say a couple of reasons, but then he's like, I just don't believe in the Bible. And the Bible's this, the Bible's that, the Bible's this, the Bible that. And then at first I go, well, I get that. I said, there's some things in the Bible that I can see would be pretty tough for you to want to go, I accept that and all that stuff. Yeah. And then we just started talking about the Bible stuff and it was fine. Okay. And then I drove away that night going, that's not really what he was after. And because I was like, that conversation didn't really go anywhere. Yeah. And then so I prayed, I go, okay, God, if I see him again, I'm just going to love on him and have a little fun with him because he's not really looking for the Bible answers. Yeah. He's just really looking for someone that cares about him because the dude has been, I just kind of went through his story because he shared some of his story. I asked him, I thought, yeah, this is what he really looking for. And so every time I see him now, that's just what I do.
Hmm. And I bet that has a greater impact than all the answers you could answer right.
Now, I pray that's the case, but he's by himself,
Yeah.
and he doesn't want to be by himself.
Hmm. Mark, as we wrap up this conversation, is there anything that maybe you're hoping I would ask or you wanted to share or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm more and more convinced that God is really at work in our one's lives more than we can see right now. I really do. I think God is moving and stirring and all that stuff. And I think the Jesus followers that have the heart of God, not just for God, but his heart,
Hmm.
and that have the courage and the boldness, not weirdness, okay? The courage and the boldness to step into those relationships intentionally and to do some of the things that we talked about in this talk. I tell you, I think there's so many lives that are going to be changed if we would be willing to do that. But if we don't, we will miss out, and we will just be a church for church people. And there's nothing better than new life. It breathes life into every church, and it's meant to. It's like when a new baby comes into a family, everybody goes, "Oh, this is awesome." Well, you know what that new baby is in the Christian sense? Someone that was far from God, or someone who didn't know God. They come to know him. And so that brings life into any church, and it's meant to, because it's our calling. And so I would just continue to encourage people, don't minimize this. Don't, look to other things for this. This is part of the calling. This is part of God's heart. This is where God's at work. And when we step into these relationships and this process, which is clunky and hard and confusing at times, it's okay. It's normal. We really are connecting with where God's at work. And when we connect with where God's at work, we are connecting with God.
And let's hope we see lots of that happening this Easter. And Mark, just thanks for chatting with me, and thanks for sharing and give us some encouragement and lots of wisdom.
Hey, I'm a fellow stumbler on the journey, so it's always a joy for me.
Thanks. Well, that was my conversation with Mark. As far as takeaways go, I have two practical things and one conceptual thing. The first practical thing is to understand the real heartbeat behind a question. Like, why is this important to them? And feel free to ask them that. That can really shape what you actually talk about. The second is to acknowledge how something strange might sound, or how you first felt when you heard something like that. As far as conceptual goes, I found it really fascinating that for most people, while they may have questions about things like the supernatural, and it's valuable to answer those, the deepest thing they still need is connection and to experience the hope and love of Jesus through you. Answers are still important, but let's make sure we don't miss the heart of the person in the process. For more resources on how to invest in your one and how to help them find Jesus, or how to even discover who your one might be, head to theridgecc.com/yourone. You can find lots of helpful resources and things to help you out. And there's lots of links to other podcasts we've done on this topic as well. You can find all those links in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ridge Podcast, and make sure to follow and subscribe so that you don't miss any hopeful and helpful conversations.